So if we could start with your full name, please.
My name is William J. Thomas, otherwise known as Bill Thomas.
When and where were you born?
I was born in Detroit, Michigan, and in the Henry Ford Hospital,
And what is your birth date?
November 12th, 1923,
So how old does that make you currently?
93 and 11 twelfths. I'll have birthday in another few days next week, November 12th.
And which branch of the military did you serve?
I was in the Army in the Field Artillery.
And which units were you attached to?
In Michigan, I was with the 257th Field Artillery, and after basic training, 25 of us learned that the 930 Field Artillery ready to sail overseas, and we were afraid the war was going to end before we got in it, so we volunteered to join them. And we shipped out of Fort Dix, New Jersey, and it took us about 20 days to sail over the Atlantic to North Africa. Off the coast of Portugal, out of a 60 ship convoy, our ship, the boiler of our ship blew up, and the other 59 ships sailed away. We were in an area called Tuxedo Junction because of, they were called Torpedo Junction. And anyway, they had the boiler fixed overnight, and the next morning they took 3 sailors that had been killed in the explosion, put them in a box, weighted it down, and draped it over with the American flag. And we all stood at attention while the bugler played taps, and they slowly slid the box overseas. So that was a burial at sea for 3 sailors.
Now, let me ask you, what years did you enter and exit the
I
Army?
went in the Army on February 8th, 1943, and I was discharged on October the 25th, 1945. We racked up 565 days of combat time.
And what was your rank?
I was a PFC. PFC stands for Private First Class, but nowadays I'm known as a pretty funny fella. Pretty funny character. PFC.
And what was your role within the field artillery unit?
Well, I started off pretty much as a wireman. We laid a lot of wire across Italy and France. But my major job was forward observer for the artillery. I would climb poles and trees and get behind buildings in a position where I could observe the enemy, tanks and the railroad tracks and trains and anything that would benefit the enemy. We blew up with artillery. We had 155 millimeter shells, howitzers. Howitzer fires in an arc position where rifles shoot straight on. And the 2 nights in April and in February of 44, the Germans were determined to push us off the Anzio beachhead. So by code, we sent information to the infantry. They got down as low as they could. We lowered our howitzers, and we fired like a rifle straight at them. And through my BC scope, I could see bodies flying all over the place, all the tanks and all the trucks and everything that we blew up. And so the Germans retreated.
Now, I'd like to talk about your childhood and growing up in Michigan during the Great Depression. and about your parents and family as well. So tell me, who were your parents?
My dad and mother were both Greek immigrants. They came over in 1916. My dad's name was John, and my mother's name was Mary. My dad and my Uncle Tom was my uncle yet. We're in the 85th Division. They were sent to France, and instead they shipped over to Russia, northern Russia, 60 miles south of the Arctic Circle, in temperatures down to about 30 below zero, and dressed in regular summer clothing, ill-suited, and they had to use French weapons, and they were under British command. And they had no real reason, had no real idea what their mission was, but it was to prevent the Bolsheviks from becoming communists. And they stayed in that place for 8 months after the armistice was signed, because communications were so bad they didn't know that the war was over. So my dad and uncle eventually came back to the States. My dad married my uncle's sister. They didn't know, my dad and uncle didn't know each other in the war, except that at roll call, my dad heard the name of Zoilopoulos, and he figured the guy must speak Greek. So Dad being Greek, Thomaides, and he went over, and that's how they became friends.
So what did your father do for work when you were growing up?
My dad learned barbering, and he had his own shop. Haircuts were, in those days, 25 cents, and shaves were 15 cents, and I used to shine shoes on Friday afternoons and Saturdays for 5 cents. And I guess the customers really loved to hear me slap that ragged cluster of shoes, nice and shiny. At age 8, I became an entrepreneur. I answered an ad in a magazine, sent $5 in, and they would send me a small valise full of condiments and spices. And I walked along all the houses on our block. I promised my mother I wouldn't cross the street. And I sold spices and condiments to the housewives. And I didn't have any change, so a lot of times they'd tell me to keep the change. Of course, everything was under $2. And I found when I got home, I had earned more money than my dad. I earned more money in one day than my dad did all week, after he paid all the expenses of his shop and our living expenses at home. Then I sold Liberty. Then my dad pointed out that those customers were time expense customers, and they probably wouldn't buy anything again for another year or so. So I switched over to selling Liberty and Saturday Evening Post. Those came out every week, and they cost 5 cents. So then I got to be a paper boy. I won spelling bees in school and penmanship. And in 1939, I increased my paper route from 46 to 106 in an all-expense paid trip to the New York World's Fair, where I saw the fair for 2 days. It's three days in New York City, and that's where I saw the first showings of Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz with Judy Garland. And if you can imagine, a 16-year-old kid sitting in the fourth row of the Rockefeller Center and looking up at all those long legs of the Rockettes. What a thrill that was then. We toured New York City and walked on Times Square, saw the Statue of Liberty, and came home.
And did you have any siblings growing up?
I had two younger brothers and a sister. Jim is still alive. Jim was in the Navy and Babe was in the Army. Jim is alive. He's a year and a half younger than I am. Babe died of cancer. My sister died of cancer. My dad died of stomach cancer. My mother lived to 92, and then she passed away.
And were you guys close growing up?
My brother and Jim, and we had a lot of little kid battles all the time. And one time I bloodied Jim's nose, and he bled. And Mother said, "You keep hitting him like that. If he keeps bleeding, he's going to die." So he never had another bloody nose, ever. So we got pretty close after that.
Now, did your family experience any hardships during the Depression?
Well, it was fortunate for us that a lot of times, instead of paying my dad cash, which people didn't have, they would pay him in fruits and vegetables, homegrown stuff, chickens. And he brought a rabbit one time, a live one. It got to be one of my pets. One day it disappeared, and we were eating rabbits for dinner. My mother worked in a chili factory, and instead of always paying her in cash, a lot of times we paid her in cans of chili or chili and beans, and she brought those home. So we ate pretty well, and we didn't know we were poor until we found out about other people being poor, worse than us. So we came through the Depression okay.
Now, who were some of your close friends growing up?
Well, I had a crush on a girl. I was in the 7th grade. Her name was Marion. And first time I danced with her, she just giggled and giggled and giggled. And I could, as soon as the music was done, I walked away. John Southerner is a close friend. He died over in France. Bill Perry was a close friend. He died. Bob Keslis was a close friend, and he worked for the post office. I haven't seen him for 10 years. Bob and I played baseball together in the same team. We played for American League in the American Legion, but our sponsor was the Club Detroiter, which is a bar in Detroit, and every time we won, they would serve us all the beer we wanted. And on Sundays, we play on Thursday night and Sunday morning. One Sunday morning, I didn't have a car, so Bob drove me to his car, but he made a big U-turn, dropped me off on my side of Grand River Avenue, and I didn't want people to think I was drunk because I'd had a couple of beers. I tried to run home. I stumbled on the curb, but I didn't fall down. I didn't want the people coming home from church to see me.
Let me ask you, in high school, besides baseball, were there any other sports or activities that you were involved in?
Well, the reason I gave up basketball is the taller players, every time they shot a ball toward the hoop, they came down with their hands, they'd hit me on the shoulders, and that stumped my growth. That's what I tell people. No, I played, I was too busy. I played baseball, but I had to go to Greek school besides American school, and that was a couple of days a week for about an hour and a half at Greek school. So I didn't speak any English until I was in kindergarten. Then I learned from the kids at school how to speak English.
Now, do you remember where you were when Pearl Harbor was attacked on that day?
I was working at Cadillac Motor Car Company on that Sunday. We were manufacturing the connecting rods for the Allison engines that went into the fighter planes, the P-47, P-51s. And that day it got very, very quiet. Everybody wondered what happened. They wondered what the hell is Pearl Harbor and where is it at? Nobody knew. There's a lot of tears. And then about an hour later, our foreman got up on a bench and said, okay, we've been building these airplanes for Allies, for the French and the German and the English, and now we concentrate on building these planes for our boys. So everybody went back to work. Worked more energetically than I ever did. I transferred over to, I was getting paid 80 cents an hour. I transferred over to Fisher Body and became a riveter over there, and became such a good riveter they made me repairman for anything that didn't pass inspection. And eventually I trained about 30 women who came into the workforce. A lot of women did. Those women called themselves Rosie the Riveters. There's a magazine called Rosie the Riveter, and I've sent articles to them.
Now, were you still in high school at the time?
Well, I only went up to the 11th grade because of the Depression. Had to raise more money for the family, so I joined the CCC, which is the Civilian Conservation Corps, and they shipped us up to Camp Rako, which is near Sault Ste. Marie, and northern Michigan, and I was the only guy in the whole group that could typewrite. So they asked me they told me to go to work in the Forest Ranger Station. But before that, I fought 3 forest fires. And I was lucky being a short guy. I used a pickaxe where the bigger guys had to carry 5-gallon cans on their back. So that's the way we fought the 3 fires. Then I got to the ranger station, and I sat in front of a switchboard, and when one of the guards called in, I put the plug in, and he'd tell me where he wanted to talk, who he wanted to, and so I put the other plug in, and that's the way we made connections. That's the way telephones operate in those days. And when one of the guards called in, I had a map, big map of the forest in front of me. So when this guard called in, and he told me where he was, and I pulled a string down and another string across. Where the two strings cross, that's pretty much where the smoke or the fire was. So then we'd send the CCC boys out, and they would fight the fire. And forest fires are a lot easier in those days. They didn't have all the residents and all the, well, it was easier then, because it's strictly forest fire, and it wasn't cars and homes that we had to be concerned about.
Now, were you drafted into the Army, or did you enlist?
My two buddies, their numbers came up in the draft, and so Bud Martin and Bill Perry and I all joined together. We thought the Army would keep us together. We asked to be in one unit. Bud Martin was sent into the infantry. He died in the Battle of the Bulge. Bill Perry was sent Air Transport Command in the South Pacific, and he died of, well, he got hit in the face and disjointed his jaw, so he got to drinking a lot, and he died of liver disease. And I'm still here.
So, can you tell me about where you went to boot camp and your basic training experience?
Well, we left Battle Creek, Michigan, went down to Camp Gordon, Georgia. We learned we were going south for the winter. It was colder in Georgia than it was in Michigan, but we went through the obstacle course, and we went through all the parades and all the marching type stuff, all the drill exercises, and after we completed the obstacle course, we found out that the 938 Field Artillery had just come off maneuvers, and they were ready to go overseas and needed 25 guys to fulfill their complement. So 25 of us joined them. So I was no longer I had trained I trained to pull a lanyard on the 105 Howitzer, but when I joined a new outfit, they needed a cannoneer, so they put me in the communication squad, so that we laid wire. We had great big reels of wire on the back end of a truck, and we just laid communication wire because we had communications very important for all the radios and telephones to be hooked up. There are many nights when we had to go out and find where maybe a piece of shrapnel or a tank antenna had taken out a wire, so we'd have to go out and repair that. And one night, coming back, there was a Jeep coming toward us, had little peep lights, because we didn't use it for the headlights. We didn't want to be detected by the enemy. So Ernie Powell is in one Jeep coming toward us, and we veered off to the right. His driver veered off to the right. They went down a ditch. 7 of us guys got out of the truck and went back and pulled the Jeep back onto the road for them. That's when I met Ernie Powell. I met Bill. Bill, he was a cartoonist for the Stars and Stripes magazine at the Army newspaper, and I was coming down a pole one day, And I saw there's a convoy, and he was in a Jeep. He had to sit there until the convoy went by. And I yelled out to him, "Hi, Bill." I said, "That's a great cartoon." He said, "All the guys really enjoy them." So he thanked me, and he drove off. Years later, after discharge, I found out he was in a hospital down in Newport Beach. So two of the guys and I went down to visit him, and the lady in charge told us, "Don't be alarmed if he doesn't respond, because he's got Alzheimer's." And so anyway, he was on the other side of the bed when we walked in his room, and I said, "Hey, Bill, do you remember the time I came down the telephone and all of a sudden the lady put her hand on my shoulder?" She said, "He's never responded like that before." So that one memory came back to him. It was a great day.
Now, once you guys were sent from the United States overseas, where were you guys sent to? Where did you go?
Well, we crossed the Atlantic and went past the Rock of Gibraltar. We landed at Oran, Algiers, North Africa. We were there for about a couple of weeks and for a little more training. And then we were supposed to join Patton to go to Sicily, but instead there's a mix-up in the convoy. So they pulled us off to one side, and we went to Naples. And the first day we got there, as soon as we got there, two German planes came strafing. And luckily for us, two college kids were there, and they led us down to the bomb shelter, the bottom, the basement of their college. So we were safe there. There was some strafing on the ship that we were on, but it didn't do any serious damage. After that, we fought our way up to Monte Cassino, and the Germans were so well fortified there that we only moved about 1,000 yards in a couple of weeks. That was like going no place. So that's when they decided to go ahead and establish the Anzio Beachhead to come. It's up near Rome on the ocean. And we came up behind the Germans. We landed safely. There's no naval gunfire because we didn't want to alert the Germans. We caught them completely by surprise. But we were delayed there by the general in charge because he wanted to make sure that all the shipments of the food and ammunition came ashore, and he was fatigued from the other battles and should never have been in charge. But for those 2 days, the Germans flew their troops in from northern Italy and flew in from southern France, and they had us surrounded. So we were like the fish in a fishbowl at the time. But after 4 or 5 months, all the firing back and forth, they had anyway, they fired our artillery, their artillery, I fired back on them. There was a time when we'd gone for 3 weeks without any fresh water except one canteen a day. And then one day the truck came in with 35-gallon cans of water, and all the guys started shaving all our beards and goatees off, and I'd lathered it all up to shave my little 19 hairs off my chin, and had my face all lathered up. And in combat, you learn that when the first shell goes over, If you hear the shell, it's already gone past. A second shell come over and hit a tree. Big limb of the tree, big branch of the tree come over and hit me in the mouth, and the face all swelled up, and there's a lot of blood as I lay on the ground. One of my buddies said, "Hey, Tommy, you look like strawberry shortcake." So anyway, he took me to the hospital, field hospital, and there's a tall lieutenant, or second lieutenant, and his military creases, beautiful uniform. He looked great, but he hadn't seen any combat. Anyway, for 3 weeks with no bath, we slept in our clothes for those 3 weeks. We didn't change, and probably smelled pretty bad. So anyway, he extended his long arm toward my face. He said, "Soldier," he said, pulled his arm back. He said, "Soldier, best I can do for you is give you a couple of aspirins." I immediately lunged at him. I was going to beat him up, but two guys grabbed me, Herb Fox and Orderly, and I calmed down. Then I reached for my pistol. I was going to shoot, but the pistol was in the truck. That was good. So they took me down to the next hospital. I had 4 front teeth that were out, and the 5th one was kind of loose. So the real professional doctor, dentist, pulled that one tooth out, and I rested for a couple hours and went back up front. And for the next couple of months, I just mouthed all my food until we got to Rome on June the 4th, 2 days before the big landing in Normandy.
Now, when you were in combat, what was your responsibility? What was your job?
My job, the biggest part of my job was forward observer. I would climb trees and poles and get behind buildings and look down on try to locate all of the locations of where the enemy was. All the trucks and tanks and road train stations, we blew all that stuff up. A lot of German bodies flew around because the artillery is pretty devastating. And big part of my job was for an observer.
And would you give the coordinates to the guns to where to shoot?
I would tell them where they are. They would call fire control. They would figure out the coordinates and give the instructions to the gun sections, and they would fire. One day, we've been firing all night, and Lieutenant Gilbert went down to the Jeep to rest a little bit. Corporal Zerati was getting a few things prepared, and so when a call came in from gun number 1, which did all the adjusting, they told me that they just brought back a gun they just replaced the tube on it, the barrel, and they wanted to adjust that gun with the rest of them, so they were going to fire at my command. So the first shot went way up to the right, way off, but then I spotted a guy on a bicycle. He must have been a German messenger. So I redirected the fire. The guy never knew it hit him, blew him back up. And about a minute later, one of the bicycle wheels rolled down and fell right on the road in front of us. So, but the closest I ever came close to shooting anybody directly was after the war. We had a bunch of prisoners, and we were ready to transport them to their respective countries. And this one German kid, about 14, saw how little I was So he lunged at me, and my carbine automatic came up under his chin, knocked him, hit him in the jaw, and as he lay on the ground, I was ready to pull the trigger. There was one in the barrel set to shoot, and I didn't. As close as I ever came to close to killing anybody directly.
Is he getting tired?
Yeah.
I could tell.
Very easy.
Okay, so can we talk about your first days in combat and your experiences there and what your thoughts and feelings might have been?
Well, our howitzers are split trail, so that meant that both had to be dug in, and that kept the gun from bouncing around, where before we had a single trail. Now I had a split trail. Of course, it would close up when we traveled. And so we had 4 guns each battery. There's 3 firing batteries, and a headquarters and a supply quarters. So naturally, we were in Battery A, which is a firing battery. And as a forward observer, I did all the things I needed to do. But because the Germans were firing their 80mm shells at us, we dug in. Mousy Reed was the sergeant, and so he and I dug 5.5 foot deep, and we made 2 mounds. We dug down so that we had a mound on each side, and this is all opened. And then we dug a little space in the middle so we could stand up. And he and I are both about the same size. So we covered it over with saplings, and we put sandbags on top. The dirt we took out of the hole, we put it in the sandbags that the supply tent supplied us with. So then, because our our powder bags used to come in a long tube, black tube, and three together, so they had an iron rod in the middle screwed onto it. So we used the metal ends on top, because the Germans were firing armor-piercing shells, and we figured if it hit the metal on the outside, the concussion inside the dugout would be easier. Well, 3 other guys, one guy went to the hospital, and the other 3 guys dug a new dugout, and with the enemy that side, they blocked that side, so they put the opening on the opposite side. But as it happened, one night when they were shelling one of the trees, one of the shells hit a tree, and the shrapnel came back in the doorway, and the 3 guys laying there, one guy was laying on his back, and he got hit in the rump. The other guy was sleeping on his back, and he got hit in the thigh. And the guy in the middle didn't get hit at all, but he was the hardest to control because he just kept figuring, well, why did the other guys get hit and I didn't? So he felt guilty about that. So he had to calm him down. Well, the guy who was bleeding, I took off my belt. I came over from my dugout, and I heard about they got hit over there. Mm-hmm. So I put my belt around the guy's thigh to help stop some of the bleeding. Then went looking for the medic, a guy we called Mama, because he was so good about taking care of people. So he came over and gave him a couple of shots of morphine, or a shot. And anyway, we ended up with 13 guys in our dugout. And somebody's superstitious about number 13. So we invited him to go outside if he wanted to. He declined. He thought 13 was all right. He felt safer inside. So the night passed, and in the meantime, all of our guns were firing right back. First couple of days on the beachhead were not too bad. It was quiet, and the Germans hadn't found out yet that we had landed there. But when they did, they just opened up. And I told you about, we fought them off so they didn't drive us in the ocean. And we fought all the way down to Rome. We entered Rome on June the 4th.
The beachhead you were talking about, is that at Anzio?
Anzio.
Okay.
And anyway, after that, we had a little time off in Rome. We took in the sights, the Colosseum, and we climbed all the way up to the top of St. Peter's Cathedral. There's a dome way up on top, and we climbed a windy stairway going all the way up there. And we could look out in every direction because they had little peepholes open. And the guide told us that it was such a clear day we could see about 80 miles that day. So we could see some of the ships out in the harbor.
Now, how long was it after you had landed at Anzio till you had made it to Rome?
About 4.5 months. From January 29th, we landed 1944, and it was June the 4th we got into Rome. So whatever time that is.
Was that a constant combat?
Yeah.
All the way there?
Yep. And then, anyway, we took a little time off for training. Then we got on a Liberty ship and we sailed over to southern France. We didn't know we were going there. But on August the 15th, 1944, we made a landing there. But that was altogether different. The Navy really opened up. The cruisers and the battleships were out there in the harbor, a couple miles behind us, and they were firing. It was just a beautiful sight to see all those rockets flying overhead, landing on and hitting Germans. In fact, the Germans had their breakfast all laid out on the table when we landed, and so naturally they had to abandon all that and try and take off. But we fought all the way up to along the Swiss border, even though they're neutral, Switzerland. What's his name? Anyway, we crossed over and we bought a bunch of Swiss watches and some other stuff. We brought it back over to our camp in Rome, in France there, and we just gave it. We sold a lot of stuff to all the other guys. Of course, money was no value, but anyway, we sold the stuff. So then we got up to northern France, Alsace-Lorraine, northeastern part of France. We were supposed to go up to Bastogne to the Battle of the Bulge, but instead we were ordered to cross the Rhine. So before we did, we bombarded the city of Mannheim in Germany, and we flattened it. When we crossed a pontoon bridge, in fact, one of the guys here was one of the engineers that was on the crew that built that bridge. And if you can imagine a pontoon bridge with all the heavy trucks and all the tanks and all the other stuff crossing over the Rhine on a pontoon bridge. Anyway, crossed over, we we shelled a few more places, and we got down to the town of Heidelberg, and we had our guns all set up. As a forward observer, I was able to see a whole bunch of German women with their mops and brooms beating the German soldiers on their helmets, chased them out of town. So when I saw this, I reported to the lieutenant. He looked through his scope, and right away, we quit firing. We didn't fire at all. It's a good thing, otherwise we would have flattened the town and flattened Heidelberg. But in such a beautiful town with all the universities, all the colleges, all the beautiful buildings they had, so we saved the town of Heidelberg that way. Then we fought our rest of our way on down to Munich, and that's when I almost shot a guy. In Munich, we had a bunch of, they had another town called Wolfertshausen, very close to Munich, where they used to, a lot of the people that were kept there wrote back to their friends and relatives, told them how wonderful it was. They had a big brewery, they had a big bakery, and a big hall where they danced, and made a lot of bread there, bakery. So by the time the French came to Wolfertshausen, the people who had been there were shipped out as laborers for the Germans, and they didn't know they were doing that, but that's how a lot of them work for the Germans free. Then we passed a little place called Dachau, which is one of their concentration camps. We could smell it for about 10 miles before we got there. The breeze was blowing in our direction. And, of course, it was human flesh that was burnt. And we didn't actually go in and see any of it, but there was a stockade, and the next day or two, we had a bunch of prisoners all locked up there. They called those people Volkssturm, which was a group of older men and younger kids. They weren't in the regular army, but it was the people. That's what I meant. Volkssturm was a People's Army. So the first 4 or 5 guys walked by, and the kid about 14 or so, he about my size, and he lunged at me, and I came up with a butt of my carbine, and I caught him under the chin, and he went down, and I was ready to pull the trigger. One was in the chamber, but I didn't fire. And some of the older guys picked the kid up and walked off with him. But the next 4 or 5 guys all said bitte, which means thank you in German. Thank you for not killing him. So I came that close to shooting a guy. Well, then one night, Jimmy, I forget his last name, I'm sure it starts with a C. He and I were on guard duty, and his thought was, you sleep the first couple of nights, or first couple of hours, and I'll relieve you, and then back and forth. So it was my turn to wake him up. No, he woke me up just before dawn, and then he fired his carbine. I said, "What the hell?" Shh. He said, "I see him coming." So he fired another round. And I looked and looked. I couldn't see anybody. I said, "Jimmy, those are grape steaks that you're firing at. It's only because it's getting lighter that you can see them so well. The breeze is making a move." So he made me promise never to tell a story about him. So anyway, we continued on our regular chores. And the war was over, but I met a guy an older German, and he had a darkroom. And I asked him if I could use his facilities, because I had used a darkroom at home. I used to film in the chemicals and develop the film that way. So I had a thing I worked out with the guys, that because they'd been taking pictures, and so for the one agreement I had was they could pay for a little bit of make a little contribution for the chemicals in the paper, but one stipulation was that I could make one print for myself for everyone I made for them. So they agreed to that. Well, I had maybe 300 or 400 pictures gathered up, and somebody stole them all. So I had pictures. I had one picture I really wanted to keep. It showed a German field that had so many fighter planes spread all over a whole grouping, must have been 8 or 10 acres. And all these planes were down because we'd been bombing, the Air Force had been bombing the Plessy oil fields and blew up a lot of the oil fields. And so the German planes didn't have the petrol to fly their planes, so a lot of those aviators became infantrymen, which of course they didn't like.
Now, how many days did you spend in combat in total? Do you know?
Well, somebody figured out we had 565 days altogether of combat time, not counting time off that we had for rest periods and time off. Those are actual days that we were in combat.
Now, at any point, did you feel that you weren't going to make it back home?
No. I had a very optimistic, positive attitude, a great sense of humor, I guess. And I didn't think about all the possibilities of things that might happen. I just kept thinking we win the war and go home. And a lot of guys were pessimistic and they were warriors. I remember that my mother used to worry a lot, and I vowed I'd never worry like she did. So that helped carry me through the war quite a bit. Mostly, I guess, my sense of humor.
Now, did you think about home at all? Did you think about your mother and father?
Well, we received mail at times, but a lot of times it was little itty bitty, what they called, anyway, it was...
Is it the V-mail?
Female. They crossed out a lot of stuff that it was written, especially stuff that we wrote. That if we wrote anything about the location where we were or anything pertinent, they blocked it out, so we sent it back. But the letters we received were mostly get well and come quick, and I'll come home, and dear so-and-so. There's one guy named Dave one day who was in the chow line, and he received a letter, what we call a Dear John letter. And it didn't say dear, it didn't say John, it just said, I've met somebody else, and I'd like you to send, I want you to send my picture back. So I said, there's not much about that, just mail a picture back. He said, you don't understand. Dave said, we were supposed to get married when I got back. I said, well, about a half hour I thought about it. I said, I'll tell you what you do, Dave. Go around and collect pictures from all the other guys. I don't care if they're mothers or grandmothers or sisters, as long as there's some adult female, and just mail all those. You think the guys can spare, just mail those all, put those all in an envelope and send them back with a letter saying, pick yours out and send it back. They were sending it back. Well, he never heard from him again, and he felt so relieved because he came so close to getting married to a gal that would not have been very true. So I figured it was one of the contributions I made.
Now you mentioned having to sleep in the ground and whatnot. Can you talk about the other luxuries that you guys lacked on the battlefront? How often were you able to change clothes and brush your teeth and those sorts of?
Well, as I mentioned, we had 3 weeks that we didn't have any water except one canteen a day, and certainly that wasn't very much. And one day the truck came in with 35-gallon cans of water, and the guys did do a lot of sponge baths and a lot of shaves. But that was a day that I had lathered up my face, and one shell happened to hit a tree, and a tree branch came over, big, hit me in the mouth, knocked out 4 front teeth. I told you about that.
Yeah.
And then we got to Rome. It was great. The infantry were on the ground. They could walk. And so a lot of the Italian girls ran out and hugged a lot of these guys and kissed them and gave them wine and flowers and stuff. But we were in the truck and we couldn't reach down, so we didn't get all the adulation these other guys got, but they deserved it. So then we, let's see, that was for Southern France. Anyway, we down in Munich, and I set up that dark room. I made those pictures for those guys.
Let me ask you, did you lose any guys in your unit?
Oh, we lost over a third right there on Anzio. We had maybe, in our own battery, we had 130 guys, and I think we lost 40, something like that.
Were you pretty close with any of them?
No, I wasn't, because as a forward observer, I wasn't real close to very many guys. There was a guy named McDonald, and he was from Michigan, and there's one guy, we used to call him Wags, his name was Wagon Maker, and they were from Kalamazoo, he was, and so I was pretty close to those two guys. Wags was a bigger guy, and he just seemed like he was like a big brother taking care of me. He just wanted to make sure that nobody picked on me, and so I felt pretty safe about that. But he was one of the guys, he's the guy that got hit in the rump. We used to call him half-track because he had a big chin, he had a big rump, and I don't know, somebody called him a half-track, and it kind of stuck. So after Munich, after we spent a little time down there, then it was time for us to head home. So we got up to Paris, took in the sights, saw the cathedrals and the Arc of Triumph, stuff like that. And then from Le Havre, we got on a ship and we were ready to sail across, but in the English Channel, we ran into a 60-mile gale. and that ship just tossed right and left, up and down, and everybody, even the sailors and the Marines aboard, that should have been able to cope better, they got seasick. And gee, the furniture slid back and forth on the floors where people sitting in them or trying to hold on to them.
Did you get seasick too?
Oh yeah. I puked over the rail 2 or 3 times. And it was too bad for the guys in the lower decks because depending on how the wind was, blew our puke from up above down below into them. So I lucked out there. Anyway, we crossed the Atlantic. We got through that 60-mile gale and out into the Atlantic. Things a little easier. We crossed over and landed at New York and went to Fort Dix, New Jersey. And from there I got my discharge and rode the train and got home.
Let me ask you, where were you when the war had ended? Were you in Germany?
In Munich, and actually we were in Austria.
And how did you feel when you found out that the war had ended?
Oh, just delighted. And just everything was just too great.
And how long had it been since you'd been home?
Well, I didn't get any leave after basic training, just because I transferred to the other outfit. Then I was shipped overseas almost immediately. So from February until October, February of 43 until October of 45, all that time I was away. And then when I got home, I rode the train and took a taxi from there. No, I didn't let anybody know I was coming because I just didn't know. Anyway, I got home. I looked at the front door step. I went up the first steps, rang the bell, made a noise at the front door, then ran down, grabbed my pack and ran around the back and entered through the back door, thinking everybody would run to the front door, and they did, and I wasn't there. But when they looked around, there I was in the dining room in my full uniform, and my sister was the first one to give me a big hug, and of course my mother was crying, and she came over, and she just couldn't let go. Her baby was home. But I had a brother, Jim, that was in the Navy. He hadn't come home until later. And my brother, Babe, was at home, but then he went in the Army after that. My dad had been in World War I. So militarily, we all had served except the females, my mother and sister. But they were very busy making bandages and stuff at the Red Cross, and they did their part there.
And how did it feel to see your family again after?
Oh, it was It was delightful. It was. I don't know if there's any words to really describe it. It was just so great, just to be home, and especially all the hugs and kisses after that. And then I started dating.
You mentioned you guys came through New York when you returned from Europe. Did you see the Statue of Liberty as you guys
Yeah.
came in?
We started on the way out. We didn't see it on the way back.
You didn't see it on the way back.
I don't know. We were so much at the sides, waved to people. So I don't remember if we did or not. I think we probably did.
Okay.
But we'd already seen it twice, so.
I was just wondering if it had any impact on you.
It probably did. I think you guys probably cheered. Because everybody was just so glad to be back.
Now, did you ever talk to your brothers about their experiences during the war?
Well, Jim had been a CB in the what they call a construction battalion, but later on I found out that he was like one of the modern SEALs. He was a good swimmer, and he could swim out far enough where he'd come under the various ships, attach demolitions, and swim away. And ships would blow up a lot of times. And he did a lot of demolitions that way. And he didn't talk very much about that. Yeah, youngest brother, Babe, got to be a operations officer in Germany at the end of the war, after the war was over. So he didn't see any combat. But unfortunately, many years later, he died of cancer. And Jim was just out here just a few months ago. One of our nieces in Georgia found out about this one organization that Wish of a Lifetime, I think it was, and she contacted her other sister. My brother had 5 daughters, so the one daughter, Joe, contacted Stella, who has her own water company, and she travels around the world. And so Wish of a Lifetime would have made the arrangements for us to have a reunion out here. So my brother came out from Michigan, and Stella was in the Far East someplace, and so she flew back, and together the two of them flew out here, and the Holiday Inn real close by found out what they were doing, so they put them up over the weekend at no expense, and so they had a couple meals here, and the people here at Roundtree found out about it. So, the Wish of a Lifetime also had arranged with a professional photographer. He'd come out, and she took about 25, 30 pictures, I guess, of all kinds. And some of them got published in the local newspapers. So Roundtree got a little bit of promotion out of it. But they took a whole bunch of pictures down here in the yard. And I haven't seen any of them. But my brother was here for a couple of days, and Castilla had to get back, and that's all I had planned on doing.
And let me ask you, what did you do for work when you returned home?
Well, I had a series of, because there wasn't very much work available in 45, because a lot of the women who had joined the workforce didn't want to quit their jobs, and they stayed on, so a lot of the guys didn't have very much. I had a few odd jobs, but I decided to go back to school on a GI Bill, and because I heard or read about air conditioning, and it seemed like a coming industry, and I thought I'd go to school for it, so I signed up for school in Detroit. But even though the teacher was a great craftsman himself, he was a lousy teacher, because at morning break time, classes started about 8:30, 9 o'clock, and about 10:30 went out for coffee and donuts, whatever, and we got back to the classroom, and one guy yelled out, "Hey Joe, what do you think about the 4th race at Hialeah?" And the other guy answered back, and it was terrible. The teacher had no real control over the class. So I looked in the newspaper, and I saw an ad about a company that had been established a long time, but it was in Chicago. So I took my new Buick, and I drove into Chicago and signed up for it. Oh, in the meantime, as soon as I got back, I had my '40 Chevy that I paid $750 for. I saw a big billboard, and they said, You got $50? We got a good used car. So I bought the car, $50 down, $50 a month. And I earned that much because I was peddling papers at the time. So anyway, when I came back, I decided I wanted to get a new car. But when I went down to see the guy who worked there, another former schoolmate, and he was one of the salesmen there, and he says, well, we'll put you on the list. I said, what list? He says, well, he says, cars are scarce. They didn't build very many during the war. And you're starting a production now, so we have to put people's names to the list. But do it like I did if you want to. Go around to about 4 or 5 other dealers and put your name in. So I did. And about a week later, my Chevy was ready. So I drove over to the Ford dealer, and that car was ready, so I bought and sold that one. And I was offered always, on an average, about $500 per car more than I paid for it. So in the course of about less than a month, I earned over almost $2,000. And $2,000 back in those days was a lot of money. So anyway, I went to Chicago and enrolled in the school. It's up on Lawrence Avenue. And I worked part-time at the Harry Alder refrigeration place. But it was interesting at that time that in the retail stores they might have one television set, and people would stand outside, 25, 30 people, big crowds, right in front of that one window looking through, because television was just brand new back then. So it was interesting. But in the store I worked at, they had about 30 different parts that would go into a TV set, different tubes, where now it's only 1 or 2 tubes, but then there was so many, and they're all in disarray on different shelves. And it was always took a lot of time to figure out where they were to sell them. So I suggested to the manager a way that we could reorganize the whole thing. So he says, well, come in Saturday afternoon and we'll do it. So Jerry and I fixed up the thing down to where it's a really simplified system of where all the tubes were. I didn't get a raise, but I got pretty well acquainted with him. And as a store manager, he had just recently divorced, and he had a house out in Maywood, a couple miles out of Chicago. So he asked me if I'd like to share a room with him, rent a room from him. I said, yeah. So I lived in Maywood for a while. There's an odd thing about Maywood. The lady who owned a good part of the property there donated to the city of Maywood with one stipulation: no liquor stores. So across the street outside of Maywood were about 11 liquor stores. They all lined up on the other side of the street. And that was kind of odd. But each morning I used to take my books and ride the elevator all the way up to Lawrence Avenue. And it was about, 5, 6, 7 miles. And then ride to my job. And then, then I guess Perry and I decided to take our trip, and that's when we went to New York, and that's when I met Sula. No, we came out to California. I met her, but 3 years later, in the 3 years we were here in California, we had corresponded, but nothing serious. I told you the rest already.
And how long have you guys been married for?
66 years.
And how many children and grandchildren do you have?
Oh, we got 3 kids, all very healthy and very well educated, and 7 grandchildren. And all of them are doing very fine. One works for Delta Airlines, and he's a communications contact man for them. Nick is down in Arizona. The grandkids are pretty much spread out. Cordell, Zoe's oldest son, is up in Corona, and he got so good with the Young Americans, they hired him full-time, so he has a full-time job with them. And his sister, Chloe, the little one up there, she's over in Japan right now, but they'll be in the United Kingdom in January. So it's really a great experience for them to be traveling the way they are, and learning about the cultures of all these various countries. And Japan is one of the real favorites. The people have really, the mothers over there have really enjoyed those two, Cordell and Chloe, and they practically adopted them. I mean, they feel so close to them all. So it's just a real great experience for them. So we're married 66 years, and so it got to a point where Sula's vision is deteriorating, and I didn't want to leave our house, but we finally moved over here, and I'm glad we did.
Any advice for a long marriage?
Keep the romance alive. Too many couples, I don't know for sure, but too many couples just take each other for granted, and I don't know, they just get along and don't do anything. But I think when you have little surprise dates and little stuff like Valentine's Day, one Valentine's Day I cut up a bunch of little red hearts and placed them from the front door leading into the dining room, and then a little sign that as you enter, please follow your hearts to my heart in the dining room. And I had the table all set up with a red tablecloth, and all the plates were all laid out, and I made a salad of tomatoes and red radishes. Almost everything red I could find went into the salad, and the red meat, of course, was cooked, and I brought that out and served it. I placed the napkin over my left wrist and acted like a real waiter, and asked the mistress if she anything else you want, and she said, "Yeah, well, you just sit down and see." So we ate. So that was one way of keeping the romance alive.
Now, if you have any general advice for future generations, my generation, any wisdom you can bestow on us, what would that be?
Well, your health is the most important thing, and people ought to remind themselves they really don't need drugs. They don't need cigarettes. Some people have a aversion to coffee and tea or something like that, so that regard their health is probably the most important, and learn to get along with people. Smile a lot and kid around a lot, which is easy for me, I suppose, or it's probably easier for me because it seems like a natural flair for me. I love to ad-lib. I listen to people, and when I say something completely unexpected, I come up with something they can't believe, and they bust out laughing. And that's the best part of humor, is that when you catch somebody offhand.
Now, lastly,
And people have told me you got a great sense of humor. And I said, yeah, it's the only sense of humor. It's the only sense I've got. It's yours, Hank.
I was gonna say the last question I have for you is, how would you like to be remembered? How would you like your legacy to live on?
Well, it seems with all the writing I've been doing, I guess I must be some kind of a celebrity to some people. I write articles for the 4 local weekly newspapers. I've sent articles to a couple of magazines. I've had a couple poems published here in the monthly publication. I guess it just feels real good that people come up and say, I read your poem, I liked it very much, or thought it was really terrific. And I guess maybe I just really enjoy the elation I'm getting, although I'm very modest to talk about it. And I love to make speeches. I've been invited to speak about Veterans Day here at Roundtree, and I have most of my speech prepared already. And ending up with thanking the American people and all the people in the crowd for all their thanks to the veterans, and that's the way I ended my speech, just thanking everybody. Now, one of the things that I did before, when I was commander of the American Legion and the VFW for 3 one-year terms, I enjoyed doing that, but each year that we had Memorial Day or Veterans Day down at Seal Beach, I arranged most of those programs, got the speakers and the music and everything else lined up. And we usually had about a 2-hour, maybe 300 or 400 people. One speech I made down there, I think it was on my 91st birthday, and I finished my speech, and the master of ceremony said, and tomorrow Bill would be celebrating his 91st birthday. There must have been about 300 people in the crowd, and they all I guess all of them start singing Happy Birthday song. So that felt pretty good.
Well, I want to take this opportunity to thank you for your time and your
thank you.
service.